Welcome back, Camden Catholic. We're going to pick up today where we left off in class, and right now I'm stuck in the 106 supply closet because my room's being used by Mr. Hoover. So, we're going to go from here, and we're going to try and make it all the way to the Dark Ages this evening. So we got to move quickly so this doesn't take you too long, all right? So, we talked about the Minoans today and how they started on the island of where? Good job, Oliver. Island of Crete, right? So, they also, on that island, they performed bull leaping, which was an organized sport or a religious ceremony. They created very intricate religious systems, a form of writing, etc. So, they also created this very large palace. It was the very first example of higher order thinking, multi-level architecture, right? So, it was a great palace and city and also home to the legendary King Minos, right? So, it was the political center of the Minoan kingdom, and it was built as a labyrinth, right? Some of you are asking, well, what's a labyrinth, right? Well, a labyrinth is actually a large maze, okay? So let me show you some pictures of it. So this is one of the walls that's actually left standing from the original Palace of Gnosis that was built in like 2000 BC. So still there, and some of these paintings and artwork are still visible. Now, these right here, you can actually see where some of the walls used to lay and how very, like a heavily walled system, large stairs, and it was actually cut off all over the place. This is actually the king's throne room. It's like the worst, most lackluster throne room I think I've ever seen. And it looks more like a bathroom, but it's not. So, and that's actually his offering plate right there in the middle. And then that right there is what we believe Gnosis actually looked like at its height. I don't know about y'all, but I would love to live there. The place looks fantastic. So, also, that right there is the floor plan. As you can see, it's built in the style of a maze, right? So, a lot of historians have tried to figure out why this actually happened. And me, personally, I believe, number one, it makes you harder to get to as a king. It also makes it harder to escape if you're trying to steal something from him, right? So, but that's just my personal opinion. Now, a labyrinth, like I said, is a maze in a palace, okay? So it's like a maze, right? Now, this is the Minotaur. I'm going to tell you all that story tomorrow, so remind me. Like I said, I'm trying to keep moving. Now, also, Minoans had some art, like a major forms of art. And a lot of these pieces of art depict female priests, which is actually unheard of in any other ancient Western civilization. The Mycenaeans did not use female priests. The Minoans did not use the Greeks did not use female priests. The Romans didn't. No one did. So actually, ironically enough, the Minoans may have been the very first to have equality among the sexes, and then they were unfortunately destroyed. So, to think that they would have survived, maybe sexism actually wouldn't have existed, right? So, Minoans also successfully created the very first frescoes. Now, a fresco is actually a style of art using wet plaster and wet paint. And the great thing about it is it's extremely difficult, which shows their intelligence. Also, they're forever lasting as long as they're kept clean, right? So, they actually, because when the paint dries into the plaster, it becomes a part of the wall. So absolutely fantastic, right? So, and as you can see right here, if you look at this fresco, what was a very heavy theme in Minoan art? The sea, because they started where again? The island of Crete, right? So, and this one actually is of dolphins. I hope dolphins didn't look like that back in the day, because if they did, that looks more like a duck-billed platypus and a dolphin had a baby. So, anyway, why did they end? No one really knows for certain what happened to the Minoan civilization, but they came to an end about 1400 BC, and the control of the sea and Crete passed to the Mycenaeans, which actually kind of begs the question, did the Mycenaeans kill all of them? More than likely, all right? So, right here, the Mycenaean period lasted from 1600 to 1100 BC. Where did they come from? Well, the Mycenaeans came from the grasslands of southern Russia, and they were a Paleolithic people that migrated down to Peloponnese, which is the mainland part of Greece. Not the islands, but the mainland part. It's actually this little hand-looking thing right here. The Spartans were established there as well. So, they traded and learned a whole lot from the Minoans. And what's that great word again I taught you today? Huh? Good job. Cultural diffusion. I like where your head's at. So, the Mycenaeans lived in peace with the Minoans until about 1500 BC when they attacked and destroyed them, is what we believe. Oh well, I guess, right? Because this is another thing. Just because they went to war with each other doesn't mean that that cultural diffusion aspect didn't come out of it as well. Remember, positive things came out of war and trade. We share each other's best qualities and best traits, right? And a lot of this can be seen, especially in the Mycenaean form of writing, which is actually called linear B. And we call them linear A and linear B because we don't have any idea what their original names were, and we also cannot read them at all. It just looks like a bunch of scribbles and scratches on a clay block, right? So anyway, the Mycenaeans also created a huge military stronghold. So let's talk about the differences between them and the Minoans real quick. So obviously the Mycenaeans were a more army and military style kingdom, okay? So they were obviously much more focused on war and much more focused on preparing to stop an invasion. This gives them a gigantic upper hand on the Minoans should a war ever break out, right? So the only way in and out of their huge palace, known as Mycenae, was through this thing called the Lion's Gate, right? So that's what the Lion's Gate looks like right there, and as you can tell, it's walled in on all three sides, so you can only go forward instead of backward if you're an attacking army, right? And then also, it's called the Lion's Gate because of this sculpture right here, which has got two lions looking up towards a pillar, which is actually a very early form of Greek architecture, right? So let's keep going. This is what we believe the stronghold of Mycenae looked like at its height. As you can tell, it's much more intricate and it's much more protected than, the Palace of Knossos, right? Anyway, also, this is going to be the original setup for many of the Greek city-states that follow later on, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Now, we're going to go ahead and skip this empty bubble because it's not that important. So, the very, very first epic poetry and stories from the West also originated from the kingdom of Mycenae, right? The Mycenaeans went to war with a place called Troy. Now, Troy is in northern Africa towards Egypt, and was controlling a trade route unfairly and also unfairly taxing ships that were going from southern Russia to Greece. The Mycenaeans are actually going to win this by destroying the city of Troy and breaking through its walls. Now, this story is described in Homer's Iliad. Homer, write this down, was a blind poet that apparently spread stories in history through through oral stories, right? And the main reason why we can't 100% trust the things that he says is because what's more accurate? Good job, Miles. Written records are always more accurate than anything that is just said, right? And Homer never wrote anything down because he couldn't see, okay? So, he also may never have been blind. For all we know, he may never even existed. But the story actually endured, right? Now, the aspect that most people remember from the story is, of course, how the Mycenaeans got inside, which was through the Trojan horse, right? Now, about 500 years later, after the Trojan War, the Greek poet Homer told the story of the Trojan War, but not exactly as it happened, okay? So, now, that right there is the opposed Trojan horse, which may have probably had never existed in the first place. It's much more mythological, right? And that's a recreation of it, and that right there is Troy burning. So, looks good, doesn't it? Now, anyway, the Mycenaeans are going to be driven out of their homes by the tribe of angry barbarians called the Dorians, right? Now, the Dorians are actually going to be the ones that call themselves Hellenes, which in English means Greek, right? So, ironically enough, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans may have been the first people to settle there, but actually the Greeks were established by a bunch of barbarians. And we'll talk about like the dispute between what is a barbarian, what's not a barbarian later on, but they're originally called the Dorians, right? So, what always happens after the fall of a major empire is a period of extreme dysfunction, right? One big step back. This began a time of wandering and killing and intellectual downfall. Trade stopped altogether with the Dorian people. Many skills were forgotten, including how to read, write, paint frescoes, work ivory and gold, all of these things. And it was known as the Greek Dark Ages, right? So a Dark Age is actually something where there's limited learning, okay? Now, the only record we have of the Dark Ages is from the blind poet Homer's stories, who wrote the Iliad and is the father of modern-day literature, right? So, and here we go. This is where we're going to stop for the evening, right? Now, here we go again. The people had to create a new civilization on their own, beginning all the way back to herding and farming. It's like they jumped back to Paleolithic before they could go back to Neolithic all over again. Sparta and Athens are going to rise out of the ashes during the Archaic period and boost forward into Classical and Hellenistic, okay? So, I know I went really fast, but it's mainly because I didn't want to take up too much of your time, and also it's because I want to focus more along the lines of Archaic, Classical, and Hellenistic Greece, okay? So, that is all you have for this evening. I hope you all have a fantastic one. Have a good evening, Camp Catholic.